We will be moving on to Carlos Díaz, right, John? He is the CEO of Synapse Research Management Partners. Good morning. Hi,
Hello.
hello,
Hi.
hi.
How are you?
We're fine. And how are you?
Good. Here in Madrid, before you ask me.
Yes, you
And
paid
for once,
attention.
and for once, it's raining here. So,
Really,
for a
really.
change.
It's
Yeah,
yeah, it's a change. It's a good change because we have your son, so you can miss it for a day, right? Yeah,
exactly.
that
Exactly.
it's good that you are here. You coordinate the Neuronet project, right? That
Correct. Yes.
it supports 18 EU projects in the field of neurodegeneration, and you are talking to us about the objectives and results of the date of Neuronet.
Yes, correct.
Okay, go
Shall
ahead.
I go?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, so thanks very much. Of course, thank you, Alzheimer Europe, all of the organizers for inviting me. And I will speak about Neuronet, but I wanted to, the title of the presentation was a little bit from project results to sustainable assets. So I think that the focus of the presentation will be a little bit more trying to trigger reflection in the in the audience about how science is organized and whether the actual impact of science can be improved in any way. And I think that in Neuronet, we're trying different approaches that may be useful for the audience. So, of course, I don't have to tell you about the challenges we're facing, which are global. As we all know, we have neurodegeneration in general, Alzheimer's in particular, dementia. Um, of course, the COVID pandemic has been a very obvious example, a very recent example. But we also saw this year the devastating fires in California, for example. We know about global warming, climate change, etc. So we're facing a number of challenges that are, by definition, almost global. They are very complex, and we heard that from previous presenters. No one can solve it alone. Yeah, there's complexity in all of these challenges, huge complexity. They are grand challenges affecting, in a systemic way, the whole of humanity, I would say. And they're all urgent in the sense that it can have a very detrimental effect very soon. So this is nothing new for anyone. But what I hear, especially with the pandemic, more often is we have to follow the science. Yeah. So the solution for this is to actually wait for science to come up with answers to these challenges. And you have a small caption there at the bottom left. I checked a few days ago, and there's almost 10,000 papers on MedRx, the temporary repository of scientific publications before they're actually published. I checked yesterday, and it was 9,800 already. So if you do the math, that means something like 1.5 papers per hour that are being produced. So, science is very active producing new knowledge. Now, the question for me, and I guess for many people, is, but actually, do we have the capacity in terms of workforce, in terms of the overall human resources that we need? Do we have the wisdom, the collective intelligence to actually tackle these very complex challenges? Do we have the resources, the funding? Do we have the speed to actually respond in a timely fashion? Do we have the data? Many people are talking about the data and data sharing, etc., and how we need more. We always need more data. And do we have finally the structure to actually be able to respond to these challenges? So for me, the answer to all of these questions will be a resounding yes, but collectively collectively. So I think that, of course, with the hundreds of thousands or millions of infected people due to the pandemic, we must have the data. Now, all of most of these studies are actually being pre-published, that are being produced by the scientific groups, are focusing on one hospital, one tiny data set. So we're getting contradicting evidence. We still don't know exactly how it is transmitted, to be precise. What's exactly the clinical curves? How's the risk changing according to certain factors? Yeah. And I think that we have to realize how science is organized, and this is something that for lay people, for ordinary people, may not be that obvious. But I think that science is still structured around pretty much heroic individualism, and here you have to understand individual not just as the researcher, the PI of a project or a research group, but also individual companies. Subject to fierce competition, I would say. There's always competition for resources, for funding, for the market, etc. So there's a lot of fragmentation actually, and we've all seen that. There's overlapping efforts as well, and research is a process that takes a long time. So science relies on long time periods to actually be accumulating evidence, accumulating knowledge that then provides the answer to the question. So we're relying on marginal, on tiny bits of progress over and over. So no wonder that we still don't know many things about COVID, right? Because there's not such a long time that has elapsed. I think it's also affected by institutional inertia in some way. I think that many institutions just, by definition, almost by design, the main focus is to preserve the institution, so preserve themselves, say. So that derives in control-based policies for many researchers, I would say. The focus is a lot on preventing misuse of funding, preventing that nothing really wrong happens, rather than perhaps creating the conditions for maximum productivity. Everyone knows that there's publication bias, that the negative results are underpublished, for example, although they may be very valuable in certain contexts. But there's also, what is understood as publishable and non-publishable, and that affects, of course, the efforts of the researchers. There's a multitude, I think, of funding agencies. We see acronyms all the time. There's many people pouring in resources, but perhaps there's too many. I don't know. There's companies specialized in actually figuring out the labyrinth of the different funding opportunities for research. Yeah? There's also, and we're seeing it these days as well, changing political priorities that also affect how science is viewed, what science is viewed as a priority, and what science is a little bit neglected. Nothing more obvious than, again, the pandemic, to see how all of the other diseases have been a little bit neglected during these past months, and COVID seems to be the only disease that there has to be research on. And then, of course, this is a more recent thing, the extraordinary impact of media, I think. I see more experts than ever on TV. And of course, that has an influence as well on how research is approached. There's also the impact of social media. Some people call social media the fifth state by now. So obviously, it has an impact as well. So you have the picture there of the, depressed Superman, but I think that the researchers sometimes can feel like that. And sometimes we think about resilience in the sense of, look, let's cope with all of these factors that are affecting research. But we also have to, I think, reflect ourselves and think about whether actually it is resilience or it is, at least to some degree, acquiescence, which would be obviously something that we have to counter. So, I think we can ask ourselves the question about how science is organized, and perhaps we're suffering a little bit from a little bit of a Middle Ages organization of science, in which you have several castles, and every research group, every company is trying to build their own castle. And some castles are nicer, some castles are uglier, some are bigger, some are smaller. But in essence, castles were designed to be defensive, yeah, to protect the contents, say. So no wonder we're having issues with data sharing. No wonder we're having issues with collaboration as well. And of course, we all know that the Middle Ages were not the most brilliant period in history, perhaps, generally speaking. So we have to perhaps ask ourselves, can science provide today timely, actionable results that are actually commensurate with the scale of the challenges? But you could ask me, look, we're seeing all of these projects internationally, nationally, regionally even. So obviously, scientists collaborate. Yeah, there's lots of collaboration. And I would say, yes, of course, there's collaboration. But I would say that the productivity of the collaboration varies. So if you can imagine a curve where, productivity has a peak, there's one extreme where there's collaboration happening with but too few rules. Essentially, this is the chaos extreme of the collaboration curve, if you like, um, and that would be wholly voluntary collaboration, say, just depending on the kindness of strangers, if you like. At the other extreme, you will have too many rules, and that normally brings bureaucracy. So, a lot of paperwork, lots of rules and regulations that actually choke innovation to some extent. So, of course, at both extremes or close to both extremes, there's productivity to be had. I would say that here we have the space of voluntary collaboration, and on the right side, we have a space of tightly regulated collaboration. And if we can imagine a threshold, which would be make a difference threshold, so a level of productivity above which you're actually getting results that have an impact on society, direct impact on society. Um, there's productivity to be had in both of these extremes. But as you can see, there's also a sweet spot in the middle. And I would say that we have to strive to actually attack that space, which would be the world-changing space. And occasionally it happens, but probably if we move too much between these two extremes, it is difficult to actually reach that space. And I see many researchers that actually in a little bit of a schizophrenic behavior are moving constantly between the pure academic collaboration in the sense of voluntary collaboration. Let's work together on this or that, but without any sort of funding, etc. And they quickly move towards the other extreme, where you get a grant, but of course that the grant brings a number of rules and regulations that you have to respect, lots of paperwork, and worries about admin issues. So I think that maybe a change in paradigm may be needed here. And in the last decade, certainly in the last 5 years, there's been more and more talking about a systems approach to leadership. And I'll explain that in a minute, but you can see that there is more and more spaces for collaboration that are being created, which are a little bit based on communities of stakeholders, researchers, of course, academic researchers, industrial researchers, patients, regulatory authorities, etc., that are just willing to take action on certain things. Two examples there, the European Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, for example, that unites a number of academic centers voluntarily to try to solve some of the most pressing challenges. But also, for example, Odyssey, the Observational Health Data Sciences and Informatics Initiative, that has many contributions from academics and also from industry, but has managed to promote de facto standards in terms of data harmonization just by doing stuff, just by taking action and saying, look, who wants to collaborate? We don't have any specific funding, but we all feel this is needed. Yeah, you have there a couple of screenshots also. Stanford, the World Economic Forum are talking also about systems leadership. So systems leadership is about creating this kind of non-judgmental spaces where we avoid this fierce competition that I was discussing earlier, trying to gather voices from all stakeholders. I heard one of the previous presenters saying very clearly, we need cooperation. There's no way we can solve these problems all alone. So perhaps we have to abandon a little bit the heroic individualism and try to hear each other, just listen to each other carefully. There's a focus on, of course, trust. We cannot be always in science looking over our shoulder. We cannot always be relying on the not invented here syndrome and say, look, I know better. I'll do this from scratch again. Yeah, I think we have to abandon a little bit those practices. It focuses a lot on deep commitment to actually solve something. Interestingly, it doesn't focus on trying to solve the whole problem at once. It focuses on small bits of progress. So short-term problem solving, let's try to solve this problem first. This is a small thing that we can tackle, and then we'll go to the next one, etc. To try to make progress more quickly. It is all about co-creation, as you can imagine. But interestingly, it's about creating spaces where, what I call no pitch zones. That means that no one should go to these collaborative spaces trying to sell their stuff. There's no space for that, because actually you have to recontextualize your interest, your own individual interest within global interest, and understanding that my interest is the global interest as well. If we don't solve the global problem, what am I doing here? So it's all about harnessing this collective power, and of course mobilizing innovation in these decentralized networks. You have a diagram there, again from one of the recent publications of the World Economic Forum. So what about Neuronet? You're explaining me many things now, but what about Neuronet? So I think that the Neuronet is trying to be a tiny step in that direction. It is a very exceedingly small project by all European standards, above 1 million euro in terms of funding, only 3 years. And we actually took a little bit of a systems leadership approach. There are a small consortium of committed partners per se, but with a very big constituency. And the objective, of course, was to actually see whether we could boost the productivity, the results, the impact of the many different IMI projects in the neurodegeneration space. So to give you an idea of the fragmentation that I was discussing earlier, this was our constituency when we started the project. So you can see here, an inner circle, which is Neuronet itself as a consortium. You have then an outer circle with all of the projects and initiatives that we're tackling. And on the left side, you see all of the 18 different projects that IMI has been funded over the past few years in neurodegeneration, 18 projects. So these projects represent more than 230 different institutions, different organizations, scattered over 22 countries, more than 2,300 individuals working for these projects, almost 400 million euro in resources mobilized. So that's quite some capacity, right? It's not trivial by any means. What is the problem here again when we're discussing fragmentation? Of course, each of these initiatives, each of these acronyms and these nice logos, they all have their own objectives. Each project has its own targets. They all have their own calendar as well. Some projects start earlier, finish later, etc. They all have their own mindset. People, when they work together, they develop a culture, a mindset of their own. Of course, that's different across projects. They all have their own decision-making mechanisms, and finally, they all have their own funding to level of resourcing.
Carlos, if sorry to disturb you here.
Did do something wrong?
You didn't do anything wrong. No, you're just fine. It's just the clock. It's ticking, and I want to make sure that you have the chance to present the conclusions that you feel are really important. I also want to stretch that people are for now, because you've been talking about collectiveness and all that is threatening that. What they feel is what their perception of science nowadays is. So please start filling in that poll, and then we can come back with the results to you and your comments. But maybe you want to choose what you still want to say for your final conclusion in your last seconds.
Fantastic. So as you can see, a very varied landscape and very fragmented as well. What we're trying to do in Neuronet is to try to involve all of the projects. So actually the projects are in charge, not us. And you can see that the triangle there, I'm not explaining this, but essentially we're involving the projects at different levels, the leaders, the experts in working groups, and also small teams to actually implement things. So again, we're trying to move the center of gravity from the project to an asset view. And I think that that's very important in terms of sustainability. Again, we're trying to actually act as a switchboard across the different projects, so not trying to be an overarching initiative, but trying to actually focus on the specific results that the projects get and trying to connect those, and also trying to serve the common gaps that many projects may have. So for that purpose, we've built an asset map. This is just depicting the different results from the projects, not the projects themselves as a whole, but the different results. And in that context, we're discussing specific assets. And I think that this philosophy of focusing on tangible results that we can actually take forward instead of projects as global entities is an important concept. In the end, what we want is, of course, promote this joint perspective, trying to create a common culture, a common calendar, a common leveraging of resources. So
That
this
would,
is my final slide.
yes, that is a lovely conclusion. Go ahead, go ahead.
This is my final slide, and I think, well, I mean, if we really believe that we're in the Middle Ages, there's many authors that have been describing that after a pandemic, especially, sometimes renaissance happens. Yeah. So how can we actually move from
Yeah.
one thing to the other? And I think we can perhaps think about an H3 paradigm, like kind of ladder to escalate and change the phase. And I think the three H's would be: we need the heads, we need the intelligence of everyone, we need the hands, we need the workforce, and we need the hearts. Because after all,
Lovely.
scientists included, we're all people. So that's my
Lovely.
final slide. Thank you.
Head, hands, and heart, and a lovely, lovely image to keep projecting when you work.